So welcome everyone. This is the third episode of the Saving the Last of the Runaways. Um, Trying to save the dance of Remnants. This topic, this time, we're gonna talk about the preamps. So, based from the last video, we talked a little bit about the architectures or how the thing's gonna place together. Um, I want to do some bit corrections on what it was and then what's kind of like we have so far right now. So first of all, the um, the rack, which is I'm gonna show in the pictures, the first rack and the second rack um, has some better pictures, and I'll show it in a second. So the racks that we have here right now, it's the rack that used to be the effects racks, but as the goal is stays the same, that we're trying to condense everything into one rack and have a similar capabilities that um, Dan used to have for the first and the second rack. So the corrections that I want to make from the based from the first video and the first and second video. The second video I mentioned about the Dan's using the Marshall preamp. So that was true because there's a picture of Dan's using the JMP-1, which is becomes like the one additions to it. I had to swap out the SDE 330 to have a space for the JMP-1, and then definitely Studio Preamp, and then used to be like supposed to be a Kasha Rockmod, the first versions, but I decided to use Triaxis for like a better versatility and flexibility. Now these are the three preamps that somewhat pretty clicked in of what Dan's had for the Time to Burn and also the Last of the Runaways. So I can get pretty close with all these three preamps. It's especially like with the Studio Preamp. This one has a very amazing clean sounds, right? And then another piece that I got a clue that Dan's using a Marshall preamp is actually from the patch cables, from these bunch of patch cables. So these patch cables has like labels over here, which is I'm gonna discuss with you in a second, like how the things gets wired, what loop it is. Luckily, this is becomes the crux of how the Rocktron RSPs should be patched. So there's like saying like MAR in, and I guess it's just like what it says as a Marshall. So JMP-1 or the 9000s preamps, whatever it was, but definitely use one of these preamps. So I think that's what one of the like three preamps that he was using. Now in the next couple scenes, I'm gonna show how the things all wired together and kind of like the continuations of what I can find out from the cables, from the patching, because this is really interesting. This is really what the connections between the patch bay underneath the patch bay over here and then the second patch bay. I decided to create my own patch bay because there is conditions actually between the pre-volume and post-volume connected to the volume paddles that we will see in a second, like how it's gonna see in the diagram how it's been patched together. And it definitely like the Rocktron RSP is back again, right? C1, C2, C3, C4, these are controlling all the pre-volume, post-volume, and then the A and B Studio Preamp, as you can see, it's working now. And then the Rockmod, actually, this second one is for the Rockmod. So A and B, actually, A and B for the Rockmod.
All right, so what you're seeing here, this is the diagram of the RSBR 18, the Rocktron Bradshaw switching systems. So Rockmod breakout switching systems has the input in the front. So what it is right now here, the idea was we can get the guitars in the front, and then that definitely in the system itself, it's gonna go to the back to the pre out, which is the preamp out. The output of the preamp, either you can go directly to the loop number one, or we can directly go to the volume pedal, ins and outs. So in this case, in this diagram here, I decided to put the pre-out to become the input for the pre-volume pedal in. And then the output from the pre-volume pedal, the first channel of the Boss volume pedal, it's actually going to the loop number one. Loop number one is the Marshall preamp JMP-1. Loop number two is the Triaxis, and loop number three is the Studio Preamp. What's interestingly here with the setup is actually from loop number one and number five, we can do series and parallel. Series means that the loop number one to number fifth, it's gonna act just like regular loop, which is loop number one, loop number two, loop number three. We can stack them together. If we do it in parallel, what happens here, the inputs and the outputs of these two loops or three loops, they are shared. So what happens here, if we parallel the signals from loop number one, loop number two, and number three, what happens here, the input from loop number one is going to be the same from the input loop number three and loop number two and loop number three. Either way, the same with the output too. Now, this is interesting setup, because if we want to use wet, dry, wet, the output from loop number three is actually either can go to another secondary mixer or splitter, and then split it to become one input for the wet signals, and then another input for the dry signals. So that is quite interesting, that the setup that happens here. So what interesting from the loop number one here is the output from loop number one, it needs to be directed to the loop number six input. The reason is because loop number one to number fifth, they're all connected together, and the connection breaks until the output from the loop number five, which is, it needs to go somewhere and manually jumper either to loop number six or to the hush. In this case, from the loop number fifth here, we going to the hush input. So I put a marker here that hush input for here is actually connected to the loop number five, and the loop number five output going to the program hush in. So that's the logic out of 1, 2, 3, and then 5. Kind of like jump over for the 4. The 4 is self-explanatory. Dan's use it in the loop number 4 as a like fail verb, but I use it as like PCM 80 for the lexicon, same or similar usage as great reverb. But the interesting key here is how loop number 1 output actually connected to the loop number 6 input, and then that becomes another send and return going to the mixers, all the connections. But in this case, we're talking about the loop number 1, number 2, number 3. I think those are like the setup that either we can A/B the setup using the C1, C2, C3, C4, or is actually working as selecting what preamp that we can use. Dan's use it as number 1 as a Marshall, number 2 Rockmod, and number 3 as the Studio Preamp. Somehow I keep it the same, like how it is. It's just only like the second I change it to the Triaxis. One can be dirt for the JMP-1 or can be clean. Second can be searing lead, infamous 2C plus yellow red channels or like recto channels at the Triaxis, and the third is basically Studio Preamp. So I think that's it uh, for this episode. I think like we talk about the how the amp set up. I want to give like an overview how it's been put together, and then this is quite interesting. And thanks for watching.